Hey everyone, Mike and Dave back here with another module from our Importing from China course. Today we're going to be talking about shipping from China to Amazon FBA, the difference between shipping directly into Amazon and using a middleman to help with that process. Let's dig right in. So your two choices for shipping from China, as I mentioned, you're going to be able to either ship directly from China all the way to Amazon, basically door to door from the manufacturer through the process of getting it in a container through the port of China into LA and then on a truck and into Amazon. Or once it does get into the United States, going to a middleman and what they call a 3PL, third-party logistics company, that would kind of break up that process. There's a bunch of things you can do in that process, and we'll talk about that here as we go through. So let's talk about these different options here real quick. I'll take the first half there and toss it off to Dave. So direct from China into FBA, the pros here are for sure, obviously, it's going to be quicker. If there's one less person involved in the process, it's going to be quicker. There's no other intermediary to go to first. This can typically save anywhere from 3 to 5 days at a minimum. You don't need to pay another person. That's obviously always a plus, not having to pay someone else to unload the container and inspect it or whatever it is that they're going to do with it. There's lots of things they can do. Now, the downside is that if you need to ship to multiple warehouses, which often happens, you now need someone to get in the middle of that or ship things over in 3 separate containers or in 3 separate shipments from China, which almost certainly is not going to be more cost effective than having someone in the U.S. take care of that. So that's a downside. Obviously, Amazon's not going to pay for any duties. If the thing shows up and has any type of bill, any type of COD, cash on delivery, when it hits Amazon's door, you're screwed. And I don't even know what happens to the thing at that point. If they send it back to the port or they just throw it away, I have no idea. I don't know that you want to be in that situation. So if you use a 3PL, they'll know obviously if there's anything for you to pay over and above what might be due at that point. You also don't have the opportunity to inspect the stuff when it hits Amazon, which for me is probably the biggest thing on here. I'm paranoid about something showing up in Amazon that isn't as anticipated. Your eyeballs are not on the product from the moment that the inspector that you hire to inspect your shipment in China leaves to the time that it ends up at Amazon's doorstep. And there's a ton of things that can go wrong in between. You might not think about a lot of them, but one thing did happen to us before, which was getting mold in the shipment, and that caused a huge problem. We would have been completely up the creek if that had got on into Amazon in that fashion. They might have shut down our account. It would have been really bad. There's obviously a bunch of other stuff that can happen. For me, I like to inspect it and see it with my own eyes and make sure that it's to the level that I want it to be before getting it into Amazon. And then Amazon has some pretty strict packing requirements. Getting the container into Amazon, you have to have padding along each side of the wall and make it so a forklift can pick it up, and all these other different types of requirements that can be difficult for a Chinese manufacturer to understand or do. And there's also a lot of shifting that happens over the water that can cause it to no longer meet Amazon specs. Just from my own personal experience, the couple of things I have shipped into Amazon, quite frankly, I haven't followed these requirements and not even got so much as a slap on the wrist. So I would take this point with a grain of salt. I think you can get away with more than Amazon lets on here. We just did a floor-loaded container with the ones that we've sent right into Amazon. Just kind of curious what would happen, and it did go through. So, these other things you can't really deal with it any other way, but this one you might be able to get away with Amazon. I think the worst case scenario here is they might just charge you an extra fee to unload it if you don't meet their specs. So, Dave, I kind of went through the top half. You want to go through these other ones?
Yeah, so the next option here, as Mike mentioned, is to use a middleman. And a middleman, when we say middleman, that can refer to a couple things. It can be a third-party logistics company, or it can even be you. So you in your basement or your garage or wherever. The point is that basically your goods en route to Amazon FBA, they're going to stop at somewhere in between. And again, that can either be you or a 3PL. So the pros to doing it this way is, number one, you can have all your shipments consolidated into one shipment and then broken down into smaller packages in the US. Now, why this is important, when you're shipping to Amazon, Amazon is almost always by default going to have you ship to 2 to 3 different locations in the US. It's one of the biggest headaches to working with Amazon FBA. Now you can turn this off. You can make it so your shipments only go to one location, but you're going to pay for it. Either way, shipping it to multiple locations is going to be cheaper for you. The second thing is, as Mike again mentioned, is that when you have your goods coming to you, either directly to you or to a 3PL, somebody in America can actually inspect those goods and make sure that they're actually in pretty decent shape. So if it's you, obviously you can inspect those goods and make sure that they're up to par. And even if it's a 3PL, that people at that 3PL, they're going to notice if, for example, all your products got water damage on way from China, or something else catastrophic happened to them. They'll let you know and give you a heads up about it. And it's always better to nip those issues at the butt before they get to Amazon. The third thing is that your sales strategy is going to remain anonymous to your Chinese supplier. So if you're shipping your goods directly from China to FBA, your supplier is going to have to put all of your Amazon FBA labels for you onto your items. And when you do that, you basically raised your flag and said, hey, Chinese supplier, I'm selling these goods on Amazon. And if you're interested in making some extra money, maybe you can go try to sell on Amazon yourself. So when you have your goods shipped from Amazon directly or from China directly to Amazon, you're basically revealing all of your secret sauce to your supplier. Use a middleman. You don't have to have your Chinese supplier label anything, and you're more or less anonymous. And the final pro to using a middleman is that you're less likely to have your shipments rejected by FBA. Like Mike mentioned, FBA is pretty forgiving about packaging and shipment issues. As long as your goods arrive with a barcode on them, they're going to get checked in more or less satisfactorily. You might get a warning, and maybe you might even get quote-unquote fined by Amazon, but they'll probably check them in. Where the big problems occur, though, is that there's actually a catastrophic problem with your products. For example, if your supplier has forgotten to barcode everything, if significant damage has occurred to them, things that you really can't forecast, but that you can have nipped out the butt, like I mentioned, at a 3PL or a middleman.
Yeah, and can I just throw one more pro in here real quick? So another thing I think that's great about having a middleman here is that you can ship a larger quantity of stuff, something that you might not sell in 1 month into Amazon. So let's say you bring 3 months of inventory in, you can use the 3PL as a staging ground. So you ship 3 months of inventory into the US, you ship then 1 month of inventory into Amazon. When that 1 month of inventory gets low, you can then ship another month of inventory into Amazon. This comes in really handy. Typically, 3PL storage prices are somewhere between $8 to $10 a pallet because they're usually in the middle of nowhere, and this is one of the only things that they do. So that's going to be significantly less than Amazon's storage fees. And during the holidays now, Dave and I were just talking before this, the Amazon's fees are something like $55 a pallet position for the fourth quarter. So especially during that time, you can save a significant amount of cost. And I also feel like a fifth pro here, just after doing all this for a long time, like once it's in Amazon, it's really hard to get it back. I mean, you can do a recall order, and we have had to do that before where we've recalled our inventory. But when it comes back to us, I don't know what the heck Amazon does from the moment that it shows up to them to when they send it back to us. But it looks used. I mean, it's obviously still brand new and it's still in the packaging, but it comes back dirty or beat up in some way, and the value to you is going to be substantially less. It becomes hard for you to sell that product as new, even though it is new, when you get it back. So I think having a 3PL as a middleman staging ground is also like another great pro. Yeah.
And we're going to give you guys, when we end this lecture, we're going to give you basically the situations when we recommend to use a middleman or to use no middleman. Beginning into the cons, the big con is that you have to work with either a 3PL or you have to do the work yourself to inspect these goods, break them down, yada, yada, yada. The big problem with that is either it's costing you a time cost or it's costing you an actual monetary cost. And in my experience, if, for example, if you're shipping a 20-foot container, you might not be shipping a 20-foot container, but just as a reference point, to break that shipment down and to receive it at a 3PL, you're probably going to pay somewhere extra between $1,000 to $2,000 to pay a third-party logistics company to do that. And if you're only shipping a pallet or a few cartons, it's going to be significantly less than that, but it's still going to be a monetary cost that you're going to incur. And the final con to working with a middleman is that it takes longer to have your shipments received by FBA. That middleman is at a very minimum going to cost you around an extra week in transit time. going direct, you're going to get things in there a little bit quicker.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about how Amazon's multiple warehouse location stuff works, shipping things into Amazon. So if you're going to have to ship in 3 shipments, on average here, we're just kind of taking some random prices here, it would end up being something like $426 to ship to 3 locations versus shipping all that stuff into one spot. Now, obviously, some of the locations you ship into are going to be closer geographically to you or to your goods to where you're sending it into than others. So it's not going to be a set $142 for each of the 3 shipments, but just kind of an average. But what we're trying to illustrate here more than anything is if you are able to ship into one location, it's going to cost you significantly less for shipping. So you'll end up shipping into one location for a couple different reasons. Either you live in the Bermuda Triangle where I live, where for whatever reason, everything seems to go into one warehouse from our location, even with out inventory placement services turned on. Which is the other way that you can do shipping to one location. There's a functionality in your account under settings, we'll talk about this in a bit, called inventory placement service versus distributed inventory. And then Amazon will say, okay, well, you don't want to ship in the 3 locations, no problem. You can ship it into one location, and there is a fee for that, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. So here's that setting. You want to just kind of go over this real quick, Dave?
Yeah, so the inventory placement option is this option to have all your goods going into one warehouse within Amazon. To get to this, you simply go to your settings, you go to your Fulfillment by Amazon settings, and about halfway down the page, you're going to find this little option called inventory placement. And this seems incredible. You can ship all of your goods now to one warehouse instead of 4. But let's face it, Amazon's not just going to be sweethearts and let you do this for free. There's a cost to it, which we're going to show you on the next slide here.
Yeah. So the way that this works is if you ship into their recommended number of warehouses, which is usually going to be 2 or 3 depending on the size of the shipment, it's going to obviously cost you quite a bit extra. But if you want to ship into one spot, these are the fees that they charge. And they've changed this up a little bit. It used to be significantly different. They actually simplified it, but it is significantly more expensive for heavier items now. So if you're shipping in light items and you're lucky to be in that category, it's 30 cents per item if it's under £1. So if you're sending in 1,000 items, it'll be $300 to send in those items. And if it's 1 to 2 pounds, it's 40 cents a piece, and then over 2 pounds, it's 40 cents per item plus an extra 10 cents for every pound over and above that 2 pounds. And oversized items, if it's 5 pounds or less, it's $1.30, and then over 5 pounds, it's $1.30 plus 20 cents a pound for every pound over 5 pounds. And if you remember from previous lessons, oversized items are any items that are more than 18 inches on their longest side, and then 14 inches on the next side, and 8 inches on the smallest side.
Yeah.
So let's talk about options for a middleman. Obviously, there is you, which is what we kind of do. We actually do a little bit of everything here. We're in a great position just because we have a warehouse. So we have our own warehouse, so sometimes we become the middleman. We have things come directly from China to our warehouse here, or in other situations, because we have outgrown our warehouse, we use a third-party logistics company to do this stuff for us. So a third-party logistics company will do all kinds of things for you. They'll receive the container or a less than container load shipment, whatever it might be. And whatever you ask them to do, they'll do it. But they have probably the longest menu of service prices you'll ever see. They'll have a scratch your back fee kind of thing. If you want them to do that, they'll do that for you for 20 cents. But the typical things you'll get them to do will be like labeling your products, labeling your cases, labeling your pallets, storing stuff for you. They'll do storage fees, reorganizing things. A lot of times they can do kitting, or they can even do some assembly in some cases. So there's all kinds of things they can do for you. And there's 4 companies here that Dave and I have used or had good feedback from. The one that I use is not on this list because they're actually at capacity, but I use a company that uses challenge people to do most of the work, and it's like a subsidized thing from the government. And it's a great program. I wish they had more room to take on more, because it gets people that are otherwise kind of cast aside in society to help. But if you can also find those programs in your local area, and they do a great job. So
yeah, I think the one thing to add here is that we've listed 4 companies that we've worked with personally, or that we've had colleagues work with. In pretty much every major city within the United States or Canada, there are literally dozens of these third-party logistics companies.
Yep.
So it's not just what you can find on Google. Like if you drive through the industrial area of your town, there's probably going to be more 3PLs than you've ever realized are actually there.
Yep.
So you don't have to be in California. You don't have to be in Washington State. You don't have to be in some coastal city. They tend to congregate there, but pretty much every major city in the United States is going to have what you call a third-party logistics company.
Yep. So I was talking about like a menu of services. Here's an example of everything, and they typically will just document it. You'll know exactly going into it, what it's going to cost you. So as a, for instance, this company is charging $220 to receive a 20-foot container and unload it, right? And then its 40-foot container would be $275. And then if it's a container that's full of lots of little tiny small things, it's going to cost you just a little bit extra to unload it. And then if you have something with a whole bunch of really small things, then it's even more to unload it. So you can just kind of go through here and see all the different things that they'll do for you. To me, like using a 3PL is a godsend. It decentralizes things happening in your operation. It always makes your business easier to sell down the road, makes you more location independent, so you don't have to be the one that's at the facility doing this. If I was starting a brand new Amazon business from scratch, I would definitely be using this model to start with until I had a darn good excuse to get a warehouse and kind of go and take on that responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the most critical relationships that you can build in your importing and product development business. Definitely a 3PL, and the other company being a freight forwarder / customs broker. Two companies that you really want to form relationships with as soon as you can.
Yep, couldn't agree more. All right, so let's talk about when to use a middleman. You want to kind of hit a few of these, Dave?
Sure. So if it's your first shipment from a supplier, definitely use a middleman. If you're working with a Chinese supplier for the very first time, you don't want to be taking the risk of shipping it directly into Amazon. You want to see what the goods look like for the first time from a supplier, just so you can inspect them and make sure that they look pretty close to what you expected. If you've been working with a supplier for quite a few shipments and every time you get the shipment, it looks exactly as you want it to be, then you can take a few more chances and ship your things directly into Amazon. But if it's your first shipment, don't take that risk.
Yeah, and if it's your first time using FBA, like this is definitely a good way to have someone else that's familiar with this process to help you and avoid making any errors in your shipment being rejected and sent back to China, which would be like the ultimate disaster, right? I mean, it's not only are you paying to get it back to China, but it's all the time lost. I mean, to me, time is the most important factor of this business. It's something we talk about more and more in our organization is just how can we consolidate and compress time from the moment we're developing products to getting it for sale on Amazon and continuing to sell it on Amazon, because everything that you're going to do here is going to be exponential, like compound interest, the same that you would learn for saving. And it's the same thing here. So every day or week or month that you are losing on each individual SKU is going to cost you a lot in the long run. So you don't want to have errors and have things go back. Yeah. Anything else to add there, David? You want to hit this last one?
Yeah, and the final thing is if you've done the calculations and you've determined that it's cheaper to send your goods to 3 warehouses instead of turning on inventory placement and shipping it to 1 warehouse, then definitely use a middleman, because you get all the advantages and you're saving money. And there actually are times when you're going to save money using a middleman opposed to shipping directly into Amazon. And so those are the times that you want to use a middleman.
Yep. All right, so then it's when to ship direct. So if you have like a really small amount of stuff, it's easy to just send the stuff directly into Amazon. You're going to be shipping it most likely in that case by air or air freight at the worst case scenario. And there's really no reason not to just send it directly into Amazon. But you're typically going to be doing things that are way above $800, especially as you ramp up. We're typically doing things that are in the 5 to 6 figure range per shipment. So obviously we're not going to just airship that stuff directly into Amazon. The other thing would be if time is absolutely critical and like every day counts. So an example is if you're running out of stock on something, or it's the holidays or whatever it might be. This is one of these things where you're probably going to lose money or make way less money, but is it better to make less money than no money at all, or have long-term repercussions that negatively affect your listing because you ran out and you lose momentum? So Dave, you want to hit this last one?
Yep. And finally, like I mentioned before, if you have a lot of experience with your supplier, every time you get an order from them, it looks perfect and there's no surprises ever, then absolutely take the chance and ship things into Amazon directly. Me and Mike have both done this ourselves, but it's always after we have a long history with the supplier and also a long history with the product. We haven't got any surprises in at least our last couple shipments with that product, so we're prepared to ship things in directly to Amazon FBA. Yep. And of course, if you've also calculated that it's cheaper to send it directly into Amazon using one warehouse and using inventory placement opposed to using a middleman and having to have it go to 3 different warehouses.
Yep. So I can just real quick tell you my take on this, just what I've been doing with my personal experience. As Dave said, we both have shipped stuff directly into Amazon. The only time that I do this, first of all, I want to do it in a container that has few products in it. Things that get more complicated where there could be a better chance for error, I typically don't do it. A lot of times, actually, I only do this with a container that's one SKU. Yeah. I typically will only do this if it's a container of products that I know that I'm going to sell through in 2 months or less. So basically very high moving, high volume products. Otherwise, it's going to be better, as we said, to let that go to a 3PL first and hold some of your inventory. And things that just have a very little chance of having any type of transit problems. Things that we saw that are more breakable or more susceptible to like mold or other things. I will still have go to a 3PL. So use your best judgment. I don't really want to talk about the exact SKUs that we send directly into Amazon, but they're very obvious slam dunk. Like we're selling just a ton of them. It doesn't make sense to have it go someplace else first for any reason. That there's nothing that can really go wrong with the product. Now that I said that, the next time we send it in, probably something will go wrong. But these are things that are just no moving parts. Like nothing can really go wrong. And we send it directly into Amazon. So that's how we handle it. And I encourage you, if you're in your early stages of doing this stuff, to use a 3PL first and make sure that you don't end up in a situation where your account could be compromised, shut down or have other problems because you wanted to save a few dollars shipping directly into Amazon. Okay. That is the end of this module. Anything else to add real quick, Dave, or you want to wrap up this module on FBA?
No, I think that wraps it up pretty nicely. Again, I think just so students know, probably 99% of the time you are going to be using a middleman unless you're shipping a really small shipment in, that 1 carton air shipped by UPS shipment. Everything else, you're probably going to use a middleman, but know your options for shipping things directly into Amazon because it is a choice that you have.
Yep, totally agree. All right, guys. Well, we're done with this module. We'll see you in the next one, and happy selling until then.